Blood pooled on the bunker's hard concrete floor, where Donald's knuckles had split open, as he pummeled the steel-reinforced walls, refusing to accept humanity's imminent extinction at the hands of the ruthless Gamilons. Those infernal black ships, descending from the heavens like a plague of locusts blotting out the sun. The air raid sirens, wailing like banshees, men, women and children running for their lives as plasma bolts rained down, reducing flesh and bone to ash. Donald's fingers curled into fists, nails biting into his palms. He rose from the sweat-soaked mattress, joints cracking in protest. 3 months, 3 goddamn months, since he'd holed up in this decrepit bunker with the handful of civilians he'd managed to save. 92 days of rationing the dwindling food supplies, of praying to a god he no longer believed in for a miracle that never came. But no more. He'd be damned if he let the Gamilons win without a fight. Humanity survived the dinosaurs, the Ice Age, and 1,000 wars. They would survive this too, or die trying. Donald strapped on his battle-scarred combat armor, the weight familiar and comforting. He checked his plasma rifle, slamming a fresh magazine into place with a satisfying click. One way or another, this ended today. He tucked the faded photo of his wife and son, both vaporized in the initial attack, into his breast pocket, right over his heart. As Donald strode towards the bunker's entrance, he failed to notice the blinking red light on the security camera feed behind him. A lone Gamilon scout named Vox watched the screen, mandibles clicking in dark anticipation. At last, he had found the human vermin's hiding place. His compound eyes glinted with cruel hunger as he readied his plasma rifle. Donald's boots thudded against the metal grating as he made his way through the bunker's dimly lit, claustrophobic corridors. The only sound was his own ragged breathing and the distant hum of the generator. Then he heard it, a faint skittering echoing off the walls. He froze, heart pounding in his ears as he strained to listen. The sound grew louder, closer, until a shadow moved at the end of the corridor. Donald raised his rifle, finger hovering over the trigger, ready to fire at the first sign of a Gamilon. But as the figure stepped into the light, he realized it was just a boy, no more than 10, with dirty blonde hair and wide, terrified eyes. "Pete, please don't shoot," the boy stammered. "I'm Sam. I got separated from my family during a supply run. I've been hiding in the air ducts for days." Donald lowered his weapon, relieved but wary. The Gamilons were masters of deception. He approached the boy to check for signs of a disguise. A faint clicking sounded behind him. Donald whirled around, but too late. Vox, the Gamilon scout, had his plasma rifle aimed at Donald's head. "Drop your weapon, human," Vox hissed, mandibles clicking in a grotesque smile. Donald hesitated, grip tightening on his rifle. He was outmatched, but he couldn't let Vox take the boy. In a split second, he shoved Sam behind him and fired at Vox. The plasma blast glanced off the Gamilon's energy shield. Vox returned fire. Donald barely dodged the searing bolt of energy. As he rolled to the side, he saw Sam frozen in terror between them. "Run!" Donald shouted, but the boy was paralyzed with fear. Donald had to act fast, or they'd both be dead. He charged at Vox, hoping to catch him off guard, but Vox was too quick. He sidestepped and brought his rifle butt down hard on the back of Donald's head. Donald crumpled to the ground, vision swimming. Vox loomed over him, compound eyes glinting with malice. "Foolish human," Vox sneered. "You think you can resist the might of the Gamilon Empire. You will die just like all the others." But even as Vox spoke, defiance surged through Donald. He may be beaten, but not broken. He'd fight to his last breath to protect what was left of humanity, even if it meant sacrificing himself. With a roar of determination, Donald charged at Vox once more, ready to meet his fate head-on. With a primal roar, Donald lunged at Vox, his fingers curled like claws. The Gamilon scout easily sidestepped the attack, his compound eyes glinting with cruel amusement. In a blur of motion, Vox slammed the butt of his plasma rifle into Donald's ribs with a sickening crack. Donald staggered back, gasping for air as pain lanced through his side, but he refused to go down. Not like this, not while Sam was still in danger. Gritting his teeth, he feinted left, then swung his rifle like a club, catching Vox off guard. The heavy metal connected with the side of the Gamelon's head with a satisfying crunch. Vox hissed in pain and fury, his mandibles clicking together in a discordant rhythm. His compound eyes blazed with rage as he raised his plasma rifle and fired wildly, scorching the metal walls of the bunker. The air filled with the acrid stench of ozone as deadly bolts of energy sizzled past Donald's head. Donald ducked and weaved, his heart pounding in his ears as he tried to stay one step ahead of the deadly barrage. He knew he couldn't keep this up forever. Sooner or later, Vox would get a lucky shot, but he had to buy time for Sam to escape. "Run, kid!" he shouted over the din of the firefight, his voice hoarse with desperation. "Get to the escape pods and don't look back." Sam hesitated for a moment, his wide eyes darting between Donald and the corridor behind him. Fear and loyalty warred on his young face. But finally, he nodded and sprinted off down the corridor, his footsteps echoing off the metal grating. Donald turned his attention back to Vox, who was advancing on him with a predatory gleam in his eyes. The Gamelon's exoskeleton was cracked and oozing green ichor where Donald had struck him, but he seemed barely fazed. Donald spat blood onto the floor and grinned, a feral glint in his eye. "I've got a better idea," he growled. "How about you go to hell?" With that, he charged at Vox once more, ducking under the Gamelon's plasma rifle and tackling him around the waist. They tumbled to the ground in a tangle of limbs, grappling and clawing at each other with desperate strength. Donald managed to wrench the plasma rifle from Vox's grasp and brought it down hard on the Gamelon's head, cracking the exoskeleton with a sickening crunch. Vox went limp, his compound eyes glazing over in death. Donald staggered to his feet, breathing heavily as he looked down at the fallen Gamelon. A mixture of triumph and exhaustion surged through him. He had struck a blow against the invaders, shown them that humanity would not go quietly into the night. But he knew this was just the beginning. There would be more Gamelons to fight, more battles to come. With renewed determination, he set off in search of Sam, hoping the boy had made it to the escape pods and was on his way to safety. Donald raced through the dimly lit corridors of the bunker, his boots thudding against the metal grating. His heart pounded in his chest, a rapid staccato that echoed the frantic pace of his thoughts. Sam, he had to find Sam. As he approached the escape pod bay, an eerie silence enveloped him. The usual hum of the generators and the distant drip of water were the only sounds. Donald's stomach clenched as he entered the bay, his eyes widening in horror. The escape pods were gone, their launch pads scorched and empty. "No," he whispered, his voice raw. The Gamelons had taken Sam. The boy was in their clutches now, facing unimaginable horrors. Donald slammed his fist against the wall, pain lancing through his knuckles. Frustration and desperation warred within him. He couldn't take on the entire Gamelon army alone, but he couldn't abandon Sam either. A memory surfaced, a rumor he'd heard before the invasion. Whispers of a secret resistance movement operating in the shadows. They had informants everywhere, eyes and ears in every colony, waiting for the right moment to strike. At the time, Donald had dismissed it as wishful thinking, but now it was his only hope. If anyone could help him rescue Sam and fight the Gamelons, it was the resistance. With renewed purpose, Donald set out to find them. He scoured abandoned buildings and hidden tunnels, searching for any sign of their presence. He left coded messages in pre-arranged drop points, hoping someone would respond. Days turned into weeks. Silence. Donald's hope began to waver. Was the resistance just another myth? A false promise in a world gone mad? Just as despair threatened to engulf him, a message came through on an encrypted frequency. A single line of text that sent chills down his spine. "We have the boy. Come alone to the coordinates below if you want to see him alive." Donald's heart raced as he read the message, torn between hope and fear. It could be a trap, a ploy by the Gamelons to lure him out. But he couldn't risk leaving Sam in their hands. With grim determination, he set out for the coordinates, ready to face whatever lay ahead. As he approached the meeting point, unease settled over him like a shroud. The area was too quiet, too still, like the calm before a storm. Donald gripped his rifle tightly, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness. A tall, lean man with a scarred face and piercing eyes. "Donald Griffin," the man said, his voice low and gravelly. "We've been watching you. We know what you're trying to do. And we want to help." Donald's eyes narrowed as he studied Silas, the dim light of the abandoned warehouse casting deep shadows across the man's scarred face. The grip on his rifle tightened, his finger hovering over the trigger. "Who are you?" Donald demanded, his voice low and tense. "And how do I know this isn't some kind of trick?" Silas chuckled, the sound dry and humorless as it echoed off the metal walls. He took a step forward, his boots scraping against the concrete floor. "My name is Silas," he said, his voice a gravelly rasp. "And believe me, if the Gamelons wanted to trick you, they wouldn't need to go to all this trouble. They'd just shoot you on sight." Donald frowned but lowered his rifle slightly. He couldn't argue with that logic. Still, he kept his guard up, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. "All right, Silas," he said, his tone wary. "Let's say I believe you. What do you want from me?" Silas took another step forward, his eyes glinting in the dim light. There was something predatory in his gaze, something that set Donald's nerves on edge. "We want the same thing you want," Silas said, his voice low and intense. "To take down the Gamelons and free our people. But we can't do it alone. We need someone like you, someone with military training and a knowledge of the enemy's tactics." Donald hesitated, weighing his options. He knew he couldn't trust Silas completely, but he also knew he couldn't rescue Sam and fight the Gamelons on his own. He needed allies, even if they were dangerous ones. "Fine," he said at last, his jaw clenched tight. "I'm in. But if you double-cross me, I won't hesitate to put a bullet in your head." Silas grinned, his teeth flashing white in the darkness. It was a feral expression, one that sent a chill down Donald's spine. "Understood," Silas said, his tone almost amused. "Now let's get down to business. We have a plan to infiltrate the Gamelon command ship and rescue your friend, but it won't be easy. We'll need to steal a Gamelon scout ship and use it to sneak past their defenses." Donald nodded, his mind already racing with the possibilities. He had flown Gamelon ships before, during the war. He knew their weaknesses, their blind spots. If anyone could get them on board, it was him. Silas clapped him on the shoulder, the gesture oddly insincere. His hand lingered just a moment too long, his grip just a bit too tight. "Excellent," he said, his voice a low purr. "We leave at dawn. Get some rest, Griffin. You're going to need it." As Donald settled onto a moth-eaten cot in the corner of the warehouse, his mind was haunted by visions of Sam. He saw the boy's face, twisted in fear and pain, as the Gamelons tortured him. He heard his screams echoing through the halls of the command ship, a never-ending chorus of agony. Donald clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. He would do whatever it took to save Sam, even if it meant risking his own life in the process. But as he drifted off into a fitful sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that Silas and the Resistance had their own agenda. There was something in the man's eyes, a glint of calculation and ruthlessness that made Donald's skin crawl. He knew he was walking a dangerous line, aligning himself with people he couldn't fully trust. But what choice did he have? The Gamelons had taken everything from him, his family, his home, his hope. If working with the Resistance was the only way to strike back, then so be it. As Donald's eyes fluttered closed, his last conscious thought was of Sam. He pictured the boy's face, his bright blue eyes and gap-toothed smile. The Gamelon scout ship shuddered as it limped through the sky, smoke pouring from its damaged engines. Inside the cockpit, Donald wrestled with the controls, his knuckles white as he fought to keep the ship aloft. Silas sat beside him, his face grim as he watched the ruined landscape of New Terra scroll by beneath them. "Come on, you piece of shit," Donald growled through gritted teeth. "Just a little further." But even as he spoke, he knew it was hopeless. The ship was too badly damaged, its power levels dropping with each passing second. They were going down, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "Brace for impact," he shouted, gripping the controls with all his strength. The ship hit the ground with a bone-jarring crunch, skidding across the rocky terrain in a shower of sparks and debris. Donald and Silas were thrown from their seats, their bodies slamming into the walls of the cockpit with brutal force. For a moment, everything was still. The only sound was the hiss of escaping air from the ship's ruptured hull and the distant howl of the wind across the desolate landscape. Then Donald heard it, the heavy tread of Gamelon footsteps, growing closer with each passing second. His heart seized in his chest, a cold sweat breaking out across his brow. He reached for his rifle, but it was gone, thrown clear in the crash. Beside him, Silas lay unconscious, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. Donald staggered to his feet, his vision swimming as he tried to get his bearings. The footsteps were almost upon them now, the sound of Gamelon voices echoing through the wreckage. He looked around desperately, searching for anything he could use as a weapon, and then he saw it, a glint of metal half buried in the debris. A Gamelon plasma rifle, still intact and fully charged. Donald lunged for it, his fingers closing around the trigger just as the first Gamelon soldier appeared in the doorway of the cockpit. The creature's compound eyes gleamed with malice, its exoskeleton glinting in the harsh light of the sun. Donald didn't hesitate. He brought the rifle up, his finger tightening on the trigger. The Gamelon soldier chittered in surprise, its own weapon coming up to bear. But Donald was faster. He squeezed the trigger, and a bolt of searing plasma leapt from the barrel of the rifle, catching the Gamelon square in the chest. The creature stumbled back, its exoskeleton smoking and sizzling as it fell to the ground. More Gamelons were pouring into the wreckage now, their weapons chattering as they opened fire. Donald ducked behind a twisted piece of metal, plasma bolts sizzling past his head. He knew he couldn't hold them off for long. There were too many of them, and he was running out of power cells for the rifle, but he refused to go down without a fight. He popped up from behind his makeshift cover, squeezing off a flurry of shots that sent the Gamelons scattering for cover. One of them went down, its head exploding in a shower of green ichor. But even as he fired, Donald knew it was only a matter of time. The Gamelons were closing in, their numbers overwhelming. He was outnumbered and outgunned, with no hope of escape. And then, just as all seemed lost, he heard a groan from behind him. Silas was stirring, his eyes fluttering open as he struggled to sit up. "What happened?" he croaked, his voice thick with pain. He tossed Silas the spare plasma pistol from his belt, the other man catching it with a nod of thanks. Together, they crouched behind the wreckage, weapons at the ready as the Gamelons closed in. It was do-or-die time, and they both knew it. They were the last line of defense, the only thing standing between the Gamelons and total victory. And as the first wave of soldiers burst through the ruined hull of the ship, plasma rifles blazing, Donald and Silas met them head-on, their own weapons spitting fire and death. The battle had only just begun, but they would fight to the last breath, for the resistance, for humanity, for the future. Donald squeezes the trigger of the plasma rifle, bracing himself against the recoil as the weapon kicks back against his shoulder. The bolt of searing energy finds its mark, striking the Gamelon soldier square in the chest. The alien's exoskeleton shatters like a pane of glass, shards of chitin exploding outward as the creature falls to the ground, its limbs twitching and spasming in the throes of death. But there's no time to celebrate the small victory. More Gamelons are pouring through the doorway of the wrecked ship, their shadows looming long and menacing in the flickering light of the cockpit. Donald grabs Silas by the collar of his shirt, dragging the unconscious man out of the twisted metal confines and into the rocky terrain beyond. They take shelter behind a massive boulder, plasma bolts sizzling overhead as the Gamelons close in. Donald presses his fingers to Silas's neck, feeling for a pulse. Relief washes over him as he detects a steady beat beneath the skin. He props Silas up against the boulder, making sure he's out of the line of fire, then turns his attention back to the approaching enemy. Suddenly a sound reaches his ears that makes his blood run cold. the high-pitched whine of a Gamilon plasma cannon, powering up for a devastating strike. He peers around the edge of the boulder, his heart hammering in his chest as he sees the massive weapon mounted on the back of a Gamilon tank, its barrel glowing with an eerie green light. He knows they have only seconds before the cannon fires, before it reduces them to nothing more than ashes scattered on the wind. But then, just as all seems lost, a streak of light arcs across the sky, a rocket screaming towards the tank with deadly precision. It slams into the side of the vehicle with a deafening explosion, sending shards of metal and chunks of alien flesh flying in all directions. The cannon falls silent, and the Gamilon soldiers scatter, their formation broken by the sudden attack. Donald looks up, his eyes widening in disbelief as he sees a squad of human fighters charging over the ridge, their weapons blazing as they engage the enemy. And there, leading the charge, is a figure he recognizes instantly, a man he thought he'd never see again. Colonel Jack Macmillan, his old commanding officer, a grizzled veteran of the Gamilon Wars, with a face like weathered leather and eyes that have seen too much. Macmillan barks orders to his men, directing their fire with the practiced precision of a seasoned soldier. The Gamilons fall back, their ranks thinning under the onslaught of human firepower. Donald joins the fray, his plasma rifle spitting death as he moves to flank the enemy, picking off stragglers with well-placed shots. Together they drive the Gamilons back, the combined might of their weapons proving too much for the alien invaders. One by one the creatures fall, their bodies littering the rocky ground like discarded puppets. As the last Gamilon hits the dirt, Macmillan approaches Donald, a grim smile etched onto his weathered face. "Damn good to see you, Griffin," he says, clasping Donald's hand in a firm grip. "Thought we'd lost you in the crash." Macmillan chuckles, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "Let's just say we've been keeping tabs on you," he says. "When we saw you go down, we knew we had to act fast. Can't let our best pilot get taken out by a bunch of bug-eyed freaks now, can we?" Donald grins, feeling a sense of camaraderie he hasn't experienced in years. "Guess not," he says, "but we're not out of the woods yet. We still have to rescue Sam and take down the Gamilon command ship." Macmillan nods, his expression hardening with determination. "Then let's get to it," he says. "We've got a war to win and a planet to take back, and this time we're not stopping until every last one of those bastards is dead or gone." Donald hefts his plasma rifle, a renewed sense of purpose coursing through his veins. With Macmillan and his men at his side, he knows they can do the impossible. They can save Sam, defeat the Gamilons, and take back the world that was stolen from them. But even as hope flares in his chest, a flicker of doubt lingers at the edges of his mind. The Gamilons are a formidable foe, their technology and numbers far superior to anything humanity can muster. And Sam, who knows what horrors the boy has endured in the clutches of the alien invaders. Donald pushes the thoughts aside, focusing on the task at hand. One step at a time, one battle at a time. That's the only way they'll make it through this, the only way they'll survive. He falls into step beside Macmillan, the other soldiers forming up around them, as they make their way across the rocky terrain, their boots crunching on the loose gravel. In the distance, the twisted wreckage of the Gamilon ship looms like a grotesque sculpture, a reminder of the destruction and chaos that has engulfed their world. But they'll keep fighting, keep pushing forward until the last Gamilon falls and the last human is free, until they can finally rebuild what was lost and start anew. It's a long road ahead, a road paved with blood and sacrifice. But with Macmillan at his side and a rifle in his hands, Donald knows he can face whatever lies ahead. He has to, for Sam, for humanity, for the future. Macmillan's weathered face hardens as he stares down at the holographic map of the Gamilon command ship, the ghostly blue glow casting deep shadows across his furrowed brow. Beside him, Donald and Silas lean in, their eyes scanning the schematic for any sign of weakness. "There," Silas rasps, his finger stabbing at a small opening on the ship's underside. "A maintenance shaft, lightly guarded. Should take us right to the detention block." Donald and Macmillan exchange a glance, a silent conversation passing between them in the space of a heartbeat. Macmillan gives a curt nod, his jaw tight with resolve. "It's our best shot," he says, "but we'll need a diversion, something to draw their fire." His gaze falls on Jenna, the fiery-haired resistance fighter with a reputation for reckless bravery. She meets his stare with a feral grin, her fingers tightening around the stock of her plasma rifle. "You know what to do," Macmillan says. "Hit 'em hard and fast, keep their attention on you." As she and her team melt into the shadows, Donald, Macmillan and Silas make their way towards the command ship, picking their way through the rocky terrain with practiced stealth. They reach the maintenance shaft just as the sound of explosions and plasma fire erupts in the distance, Jenna's distraction in full swing. Donald pries open the hatch, the metal groaning in protest. One by one they lower themselves into the narrow passageway, the walls slick with condensation and the air thick with the stench of machine oil. Donald takes point, his rifle sweeping the claustrophobic corridor as they push deeper into the bowels of the ship. The shaft eventually gives way to a dimly lit hallway, the walls pulsing with the eerie glow of energy fields. They're close to the detention block now, but the muffled sounds of combat echoing through the ship tell them that the Gamelons are on high alert. Suddenly a door hisses open, and a squad of Gamelon soldiers pours out, plasma rifles at the ready. Donald and the others dive for cover as a hail of sizzling energy bolts fills the air. The humans return fire, the confined space erupting into a storm of light and sound. Here it's a brutal close-quarters battle, both sides trading shots at near point-blank range. Plasma scorches the walls, and the acrid stench of burnt metal fills the air. But the humans fight with a desperate ferocity, driven by the knowledge that failure means death, or worse. In the end, it's the Gamelons who fall, their broken bodies littering the blood-slicked floor. Donald and the others press on, the adrenaline from the firefight still singing in their veins. And then they round the final corner and the bottom drops out of Donald's stomach. There in the center of the detention block is Sam, alive, but with a glowing Gamelon plasma blade pressed against his throat. Time seems to freeze as Donald stares into the face of his worst nightmare made flesh. His grip tightens on his rifle, an icy rage flooding his veins. Beside him, Macmillan and Silas tense, ready for action. The moment hangs in the air, razor-thin and razor-sharp, as the humans and the Gamelon commander lock eyes. The fate of New Terra and the future of the human race is balanced on a knife's edge, and Donald knows with a cold certainty that settles into his bones that the next few seconds will decide everything. The Gamelon commander's compound eyes glint with sadistic glee as he presses the searing plasma blade against Sam's throat, the boy's whimpers of fear echoing off the cold metal walls. "Drop your weapons," the commander hisses, venom dripping from every word, "or the child dies." Donald and the others freeze, fingers tightening on their triggers as a bead of sweat trickles down Donald's temple. The stench of scorched flesh and acrid smoke chokes the air, the only sound the faint hum of the plasma blade and Sam's ragged breathing. They can't let Sam die, but surrendering to the Gamelons means a fate worse than death. The seconds stretch into an eternity, the weight of the impossible choice bearing down on them like a crushing vice. Suddenly Sam's trembling voice cuts through the tension, his words ringing with a courage that belies his tender years. "Don't do it," he pleads, his wide, terrified eyes locking with Donald's. "Don't let them win. You have to fight, no matter what happens to me." The commander's face contorts with rage, his mandibles clicking furiously as he raises the plasma blade for the killing blow. But in that instant, a figure drops from the ceiling behind him with a heavy thud. It's Jenna, her fiery hair matted with blood and grime, her eyes blazing with a fury that makes even the Gamelons falter. In a blur of motion, she swings her plasma rifle to aim at the commander's head, her voice a menacing growl. "Let the boy go, or I'll paint the walls with your brains." The commander's eyes dart between Jenna and the others, the gears turning behind his insectoid gaze. He's outmatched, but the Gamelon code forbids surrender. With a roar of defiance, he lunges forward, the plasma blade slashing towards Sam's exposed throat. But Jenna is faster. The plasma bolt explodes from her rifle, slamming into the commander's chest and hurling him back in a spray of shattered chitin. Donald and the others surge forward, their weapons spitting fire as they cut down the remaining Gamelon soldiers in a hail of sizzling plasma. Sam falls to the blood-slicked floor, shock etched on his young face as he stares at the smouldering ruin of the commander's corpse. Donald rushes to the boy's side, gathering him in his arms and holding him close, his voice choked with emotion. "It's okay," he whispers. "You're safe now, we've got you." But even as relief washes over them, the weight of their task looms like a spectre. The Gamelon command ship still looms in orbit, a steel dagger poised to strike at the heart of the resistance. They gather their wounded and make their way back through the maintenance shaft, the knowledge of what they must do next hanging heavy in the recycled air. As they emerge into the blasted landscape of New Terra, Donald turns to Macmillan, his jaw set with grim purpose. "We have to take out that command ship," he says, his voice unwavering. "We have to end this, once and for all." Macmillan nods, a fire burning in his battle-hardened eyes. "Then let's get to it," he growls, his fist clenching. "We've got a planet to save and a people to free, and this time we're not stopping until the job is done." The captured Gamelon fighter hurtles through the void of space, its engines thrumming with power. Inside the cramped cockpit, Donald's knuckles are white on the controls, his eyes fixed on the looming shape of the Gamelon command ship. Beside him, Jenna checks her plasma rifle for the 100th time, her face set with grim determination. "We're coming up on their sensor range," Silas says, his voice tight with tension. "Get ready." Donald nods, his heart pounding in his chest. He knows that this is their only chance, their last hope of striking a blow against the Gamelon invaders. If they fail now, humanity will be lost forever. As they approach the command ship, Donald feels a sense of unease washing over him. The ship is massive, its hull bristling with weapons and sensors. He knows that getting inside will be no easy feat, even with their captured fighter. But they have no choice. With a deep breath, Donald guides the fighter towards the command ship's hangar bay, his hands steady on the controls. They slip through the energy field and touch down on the deck, the fighter's engines whining as they power down. The hangar bay is eerily quiet, the only sound the hiss of hydraulics as the fighter's hatch opens. Donald and the others climb out, their weapons at the ready. They move quickly, darting from cover to cover as they make their way towards the reactor core. But even as they press forward, they can feel the weight of the Gamelon presence all around them. The corridors are crawling with soldiers, their chitinous armor glinting in the harsh light. Plasma bolts sizzle through the air, forcing the humans to dive for cover again and again. Jenna takes point, her plasma rifle spitting death as she clears a path for the others. Behind her, Silas and Macmillan cover their flanks, their weapons at the ready. Donald brings up the rear, his hand never leaving Sam's shoulder as he guides the boy through the chaos. The deeper they go, the more resistance they face. The Gamelons seem to be everywhere at once, their numbers endless, but the humans press on, driven by a desperate need to see their mission through. Finally, they reach the reactor core, a massive chamber filled with pulsing energy fields and glowing conduits. Donald feels a surge of hope as he sees the control panel, knowing that if they can just overload the core, they can deal a crippling blow to the Gamelon invasion. But as they approach the panel, a figure steps out from the shadows, a plasma rifle held loosely in his hands. Donald feels his blood run cold as he recognizes the man, his heart skipping a beat in his chest. It's Colonel Hawkins, his former commanding officer and mentor, the man who had trained him, molded him into the soldier he is today. But there is something different about him now, something wrong. His eyes are cold and lifeless, his skin pale and waxy. "Hawkins," Donald whispers, his voice trembling with disbelief, "what are you doing here?" Hawkins smiles, a cruel, twisted thing that sends a shiver down Donald's spine. "I'm here to finish what I started," he says, his voice dripping with malice. "I'm here to make sure that humanity stays dead, once and for all." And with that, he opens fire, his plasma bolt slamming into the control panel and sending sparks flying in all directions. Donald and the others dive for cover, their hearts pounding in their chests as they try to make sense of what is happening. As they exchange fire with Hawkins, the terrible truth dawns on them. He has been working with the Gamilons all along, betraying his own people for the promise of power and glory, and now he will stop at nothing to see his twisted vision realized. The battle is fierce and brutal, with both sides taking heavy losses. Jenna is hit in the shoulder, her plasma rifle clattering to the ground as she falls. Silas takes a bolt to the leg, his scream of pain echoing through the chamber, and Macmillan, brave, stubborn Macmillan, is cut down by a volley of plasma fire, his body falling to the ground in a heap. In the end, it is Donald and Sam who are left standing. Their faces streaked with blood and tears as they face off against Hawkins. The colonel is wounded, his body riddled with plasma burns, but he refuses to surrender. With a roar of defiance, he charges forward, his rifle blazing as he seeks to end the resistance once and for all. But Donald is faster. He grabs Sam and dives to the side, rolling to his feet and bringing his own rifle to bear. He fires, the plasma bolt slamming into Hawkins' chest and sending him flying backwards. The colonel crashes to the ground, his eyes wide with shock as he stares up at the ceiling. And then, with a final rattling breath, he is gone. Donald and Sam stumble to the control panel, their hands shaking as they input the overload sequence. They know they have only minutes before the reactor core explodes, taking the command ship and everything on it with it. As they race back through the corridors, they are met with a sight that breaks their hearts. Jenna and Silas, their bodies broken and bleeding, lie still on the ground, their eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling. With heavy hearts, Donald and Sam gather their fallen comrades and make their way to the hangar bay. A lone Gamilon fighter sits waiting, their only hope of escape. They climb aboard, strapping themselves in as Donald powers up the engines. With a roar of thrusters, they blast out of the hangar bay and into the void of space. Behind them, the command ship explodes in a massive fireball, the shockwave slamming into their fighter and sending them tumbling end over end. But Donald wrestles with the controls, fighting to right the ship as they hurtle away from the dying behemoth. And then, silence. The Gamilon invasion is over, the command ship destroyed. But the cost has been high, the human resistance all but wiped out. As Donald and Sam fly off into the unknown, they know that the fight is far from over. There will be other battles, other enemies to face, but for now they have each other, and the knowledge that they have struck a blow for humanity that will never be forgotten. And as they disappear into the void of space, a single thought echoes through their minds. Humans will never stop fighting, no matter the odds. As long as there is breath in their bodies and fire in their hearts, they will keep struggling for the future they know is possible. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.